Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Sackur. In the turbulent recent history of the Middle East, has there ever been a time when Israel has seemed more powerful, militarily, diplomatically, and economically? Israel has the fulsome support of the Trump administration, and it has common strategic interests with Saudi Arabia and Arab nations preoccupied with perceived threats from Iran. My guest is Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danon. Is Israel making wise choices from its position of strength? Ambassador Danon at UN headquarters in New York City, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I want to begin with what I found rather extraordinary remarks from your Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, just a few days ago when he was visiting the Danon nuclear plant, where he said this. He said, in the Middle East, there is a simple truth. This is no place for the weak. The weak crumble, they're slaughtered and are erased from history, while the strong, for good or for ill, survive. That seems to be a message to the Israeli people, to the world, that might is right. Am I understanding him correctly?
The Prime Minister was very clear. We live in a very tough neighborhood. You just need to listen to our neighbors. You know, we can envy your neighbors in the UK, but when you listen to our neighbors from the north, you listen to Hezbollah, to Nasrallah, you listen to the Iranians, to the Hamas, you understand that they really mean it when they say that they want to kill the Jews, or they want to distract Israel. It's not only cheap talk. They really mean, and they have the capabilities of threatening Israel. That's why we will continue to seek peace, but at the same time, we will continue to invest in our defense, in our security measures to protect ourselves. We have no luxury to make a mistake on this issue.
Okay, but let's think about the context. There he is at Dimona, the nuclear plant. We know it's the repository of Israel's nuclear weapons arsenal, an arsenal which you will never disclose in public, but we all know it exists. You're the only nuclear power in the region. You have the strongest military of all of your neighbors. And there's Benjamin Netanyahu basically saying all that matters is military strength.
Stephen, Israel is a peaceful nation, and when you look at stability in the region, when you seek stability in the region, Israel is a beacon of stability in the region. So we will continue to be a place where we seek peace. We have no any intention to escalate anything in the Middle East, and our neighbors know that. But they should know at the same time that if they will try to pose a threat to our existence, we have the means to protect ourselves, and we will do whatever is necessary to protect the Jewish people in Israel.
Yeah, but of course, many of the engagements and conflicts that we see Israel occupied with are actually not about Israel in an existential struggle for survival. In fact, quite the contrary. Since March of this year, we've seen 5 months of the Israeli military lining up along the border with the Gaza Strip, using live fire ammunition against Palestinian protesters. More than 165 have been killed, including 23 Palestinians under the age of 18. I guess Mr. Netanyahu just regards that as proof that the Middle East is, again, quote, no place for the weak crumble and are slaughtered. And that's what Israel's doing.
I beg to differ with you. First, when we speak about a threat, we speak about Iran, which is a real threat to the Middle East, not only to Israel, but also for the Saudis,
no, Ambassador,
Jordanians,
with
Egyptians,
respect, my question is not about Iran. My question is about civilian protesters in the Gaza Strip who for many months have been protesting along that border fence. They do not carry guns. Admittedly, some of them throw stones. They even fly kites with flaming torches on them at times. But what they do not have is guns, and the Israeli military responds with live fire.
I will get to that in a minute, but when the Prime Minister spoke about a threat, he spoke about Iran. Let's make it clear. Now, regarding your questions, nobody was lining up the border to harm peaceful civilians. That's not the fact. The fact is that you had 14,000 violent mob coming to the fence with one intention, to bring down the fence and then to march into the Jewish communities next to our border. It was not a peaceful demonstration. That is a lie if you call it a peaceful demonstration, because in a peaceful demonstration, you don't come with guns, you don't come with Molotov cocktails, you come and you have a peaceful protest. This is not the case. It was orchestrated by Hamas, and we did exactly what every other nation would do. We protected our border.
You're sitting in New York, I'm sitting in London. I'm inclined to take the word of a very experienced Israeli human rights lawyer, Michael Svard, who has looked at cases where the Israeli military opened fire in the last 5 months, and he says it is quite clear lethal force against unarmed civilians who do not pose a danger is illegal, and this is the crux of many cases there on the Gaza border. He's an Israeli lawyer, one of half a dozen human rights campaign groups who have filed cases against the IDF in your country.
With all due respect to all of those lawyers you just quoted, I care about the rights of the Israelis who live in Israel. And when you have 14,000 people marching to the fence, and they are saying, we will come and we'll take the hearts of the Jews, they are saying it. You have quotes of the leadership of Hamas sending the people to the fence and paying them to crash the fence. We cannot take any chances. And let me ask you, what would you do if you had 14,000 of your enemy coming to your fence? What would you do then? You would protect your border. So we have no intention to harm anyone. We seek peace. And I want to remind you that 12 years ago, we pulled out from Gaza completely. We took out all the so-called settlement out of Gaza. You don't have occupation today in Gaza. You don't have settlers in Gaza. You don't have Israeli troops in Gaza. We pulled out. We demolished the houses. We even took the dead people out of the cemeteries. And instead of building a society that will thrive for coexistence, that will build their economy, unfortunately, Hamas took over, and we see the results today when they are digging tunnels and when they are throwing rockets into our civilian cities.
You sit there at the United Nations representing Israel. You know, of course, the UN General Assembly voted, I think it was 120 to 8, to condemn Israel for its use of excessive force in the clashes we've seen in recent months. We've had the International Criminal Court saying that it wants a preliminary examination of what Israel has been doing. We've had widespread condemnation from European leaders, many of whom regard themselves as close friends and partners of Israel. What would you say, given all of that condemnation, what would you say that Israel has achieved in those 5 months in which 170 Palestinians have been killed?
When you could speak about achievements, we had no intentions to see the escalation on the south. We said it very clearly. We seek peace, period. We protected our border. We had no intention to kill anyone. And you should ask the Hamas what they achieved by sending innocent people. Some of them were innocent, but most of them were members of Hamas, and they claimed it themselves, that they sent them to the border. What they achieved. And by the way, let's not forget the context, Stephen. It all happened after the U.S. administration decided to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And the Hamas leadership decided to control the narrative. And instead of you covering the opening of the new embassy, everybody in the world covered the riots on the fence. So it was orchestrated. They planned it. And it's pity that they used people's life in order to get world attention.
Getting back to the core question of what was the point, I mean, I'm very mindful that in recent days your defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, has in essence been having a de facto negotiation with Hamas, admittedly through a third party, the Egyptians, looking for some sort of long-term truce arrangement, which, according to the Hebrew press, could involve the wider reopening of the border crossings, widening of the fishing zone, where we've seen some of that already, a resolution of the important issue of captive soldiers and missing missing people that Israel wants returned, and then a wider agreement on infrastructure in Gaza, foreign funding of seaports and shipping lanes and all sorts of things. Basically, you could describe on the one hand Hamas as an intolerable terrorist organization intent on your destruction, and then after a flare-up of violence, you end up talking to them and looking to do some sort of truce arrangement with them. It doesn't make sense.
Well, first of all, I invite you to the Middle East. You will understand that many things don't make sense in our region. And that's unfortunate because you cannot predict everything that will happen with those people. It is not an elected government that was elected every 4 years and you can have negotiations with. You're dealing with a terrorist organization. They have hidden agenda. And sometimes you don't know what will happen tomorrow morning.
No, but you acknowledge then, you do acknowledge that all of this rhetoric about them being a terrorist organization that you'll never talk to and all of that, it's basically nonsense. After all of the violence we've seen in recent months, you are talking to them and there is an effort to get a long-term truce with Hamas.
So when you look at the region, not only about Hamas, but we say very clearly, if it will be peaceful in Israel, it will be peaceful in Gaza. Same goes for southern Lebanon. If Hezbollah will try to check our capabilities, it will not be peaceful in Lebanon as well. But we have no reason to engage with Hezbollah or with Hamas. But they are the ones who are trying to send rockets to dig tunnels. And we said it very clearly to our people who are in the area. If it will be quiet in Israel, it will be quiet in Gaza. And by the way, we encourage humanitarian projects in Gaza. We work with the EU, we work with the UN about those projects, but we have our humanitarian needs as well. And you refer to the Israeli boys who are being held by Hamas, 2 Israeli citizens and 2 Israeli bodies of fallen soldiers.
You've just made a point of saying Israel cares about the humanitarian situation. If that is true, why has Israel and your Prime Minister Netanyahu been so fulsome in support of the Trump administration's decision to cut $350 million worth of assistance per year that was channeled to UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency that specifically provides humanitarian assistance to Palestinian refugees? You in Israel have been delighted by that. So where's your concern for Palestinians' humanitarian needs in that case?
First of all, we have to acknowledge that it was a decision made by the US. They are the ones who are giving the funds. And I have heard Ambassador Haley speaking here in the UN at the Security Council a few weeks ago about UNRWA, and she said, why we are paying so much money when all of those countries who criticize the US don't give as much money as well. So it was a US decision. We respect it. And we think it was the right decision.
Hang on. What do you mean you respect it? You're thrilled by it. Mr. Netanyahu said this. He said,
so let me finish. Let me finish. We think it was the right decision because UNRWA, instead of supporting the Palestinians, they did something else. They kept them in the same situation. They are not resettling the Palestinians. They are not helping them. Take, for example, millions of Palestinians who live today under the Palestinian Authority control. Why UNRWA should take care of those Palestinians? Why can't the US, the UK, the EU, the Gulf countries, why can't they give money to the Palestinian Authority and they should take care of the Palestinians who live there?
These are internationally recognized refugees. As the descendants of the original refugees, they have the same sorts of rights as would be given under international law to Afghan or Burmese or Somali or other refugees. And the truth is, as Christopher Gunnis of UNRWA has said in recent days, what you are trying to do in your support of this US decision, you are trying to airbrush out of history and out of the discourse more than 5 million individuals who, according to Mr. Gunnis, have inalienable rights, but rights you don't want to recognize.
So first, we can argue about those numbers. UNRWA, they have a tendency to expand the number of refugees so they can get more funding from the international community. But the main point is where they are heading. When in UNRWA school, they teach the children that they should go back to their homes in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, they are not helping the Palestinians. we know it will never happen. So instead of resettling them, instead of teaching them a profession and helping them to bring a better future for their own people, they're actually helping the Palestinians to continue with the victimhood approach that didn't bring them anywhere. You cannot stay victim for centuries. There is a time when you have to say, let's move on, let's build our future.
When Mr. Gunnis talks about you wanting to airbrush the Palestinian refugees out of history and out of the discourse, that sounds pretty much like what you've just said to me. But I would say to you, you know the American phrase, I'm sure you do, and you're in New York City, be careful what you wish for. It could lead to massive new problems for Israel if all of the humanitarian assistance, the education and everything else that was provided by UNRWA to Palestinians, if that is jeopardized as a result of this, in the words of Lara Friedman of the Foundation for Middle East Peace, she says, it is very clear that the overarching goal is to eliminate the Palestinian refugees as an issue, but this will not make peace any easier. It is actually going to make it even more difficult.
So I want to surprise you that we encourage countries to support humanitarian projects in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza, and we work with many countries on those projects, but it doesn't have to go through UNRWA. You have other agencies, you have other means to support the Palestinians. We encourage it, but when you look at UNRWA, about the incitement in schools, about the work they are doing there, we think it's about time to find another way that will actually help the Palestinians and will not leave them where they are.
I asked you about whether, how you regard Israel's standing in the world as you sit there representing Israel at the United Nations. Another area of deep concern for many, both inside Israel and outside Israel in recent weeks, has been the passage in the Knesset of what's called by many the nation-state law, which enshrines the special status of Israel as the historic homeland of the Jewish people in your basic law. The European Union Foreign Affairs representative has expressed her deep concern. Amnesty International has said that it has entrenched and exacerbated 70 years of inequality and discrimination. Do you care?
Sure we care, but Stephen, I'm amazed. Sitting at the UN, I see so many resolutions and so much talk about Israel. I don't recall that in the UN anyone discussed legislation in other countries, internal legislation, not in the US, not in the UK, not even of the EU. So I think when it comes to Israel, people they have the obsession with dealing with everything that happens in Israel. But when you read this piece of legislation...
Ambassador, surely you haven't got such a short memory. I mean, surely you remember during the apartheid years in South Africa, the international community was very preoccupied with the fight for what was widely regarded as justice in South Africa. It's not just Israel that is put under international scrutiny.
You cannot compare South Africa to Israel, even though our adversaries, that's what they want to do. When you look at the Arab Israelis who live today in Israel, they are equal citizens. And this law, it doesn't change it at all. Israel is a strong democracy. It will continue to be a strong democracy. And those Arab members of Knesset who criticize the law, and by the way, some of them even travel to the UN and to the EU to criticize the legislation. Can you imagine another democracy that will allow a member of parliament to come to the UN and to criticize the work of its own parliament, of its own government?
Yeah,
it only shows how strong democracy we are, even if you don't like it.
Well, it depends.
It is the strongest democracy. It's even stronger than the democracies in Europe who criticize us.
Ambassador,
I believe that we are a stronger democracy than those who criticize Israel.
It depends whether you're actually listening to the substance of what these people are saying and how seriously you take it. And frankly, it isn't just Arab Israeli MKs, politicians, who are accusing the Israeli government of racism. The leader, one of the leading figures in Meretz, Tamar Zandberg, she said quite brutally and bluntly, this is a racist law. And there are many Israelis, we've seen them demonstrating in Tel Aviv and elsewhere, who support that view.
So let's speak about the legislation. I was a member of parliament, and I'm used to those arguments. But let's read the legislation itself. It speaks about the character of Israel as a Jewish nation with our anthem, our flag, our language. It allows the minorities the same rights as everybody else. So yes, Israel it is a Jewish democracy. And you can have that. There is no contradiction between a Jewish and a democracy. And everybody should respect that Israel is the only Jewish nation, and we are able to keep it as a Jewish democracy.
There are 1.8 million Arabs in Israel. It's roughly 20% of the population, isn't it? And when they read in your nation-state law, which is now basic law, that quote, the state views the development of Jewish settlement as a national value and will act to encourage and promote its establishment, there is no doubt, surely, in anybody's mind that that clearly creates two classes of citizens, Jewish citizens and the rest.
No, it's not the case. The same minority, when they will read the word of the national anthem of Israel, it speaks about the Jewish nation. When they will open their passport or their ID cards, they will see the symbol of the menorah, a Jewish symbol. They live in a Jewish nation. They know that. But in this Jewish nation, they have the full rights. They will get elected to the Knesset. They will sit in our Supreme Court. They will get the same education as my children get in Israel. That's the meaning of equality. But it's equality in a Jewish nation. Yes, Israel, it is the homeland of the Jewish people, and it can be a Jewish nation and a democracy. There is no contradiction. Some people want to change the character of Israel as a Jewish nation. But for us, since 1948, we decided Israel will be a Jewish democracy.
A final point, Ambassador. We don't have much time, but it strikes me, in your 3 years or so at the UN, you've been very quick to accuse many critics of Israel of being racist. You said it, I think, about the motivations of the UN human rights chief who's just left, that is Zaid bin Rad Zaid al-Hussein. You've said it about other critics of Israel. You even once said it about the Obama administration. Do you think it devalues notions of anti-Semitism and racism to accuse those who simply oppose your government's policies of being racist?
First of all, Stephen, we are open for criticism. As a strong democracy, we criticize each other all day long in Israel. It's part of our life, and we welcome criticism.
But when you responded to the Obama administration, when they were putting heavy pressure on the Israeli government, I think it was back in 2009, to stop building new Jewish settlements and housing in East Jerusalem, you responded by saying President Obama should not interfere with the rights of the Jewish people to live in Jerusalem. This is a, quote, racist demand. You think President Barack Obama was a racist, an anti-Semite?
No, so your quote is not accurate. When President Obama criticized the rights of Jews to build in Jerusalem, in the neighborhood of Gilo, which is part of Jerusalem, and he said that Jews should not be allowed to build in Gilo, which is in southern Jerusalem, that was not acceptable by the majority of Israelis.
Do you think, Barack Obama is a racist against Israel?
No, I think he made a mistake, a major one, when he allowed the resolution to pass in December 2016 in the Security Council. It was a crucial mistake. It was a shameful resolution that actually denied the connection between Jews and Jerusalem. And I said it very clearly that it was a shameful resolution. But when I blame people of anti-Semitism here at the UN, I do it when they are using different language when they speak about Israel, different criteria when they deal with Israel. We can criticize Israel, absolutely, but don't criticize only Israel. When you look at the Human Rights Council, when they speak about human rights violations in Israel, and they spend few minutes about human rights violations around the world, it doesn't make any sense. This obsession, it comes from somewhere, and when I see anti-Semitism, I will call it.
We have to end there, but Ambassador Danon in New York City, I thank you very much for joining me on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much, Stephen.